So you have this thing about pronouncing Shang-Chi's name correctly.
Yeah, and I am not a good Chinese speaker. I'll say that. As someone who is not a good Chinese speaker, I do. But I have several TED Talks about how you pronounce it and also how you write it. But I mean, let's get it out of the way. Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi is how it's said. Let's just say
Shang-Chi.
that. Shang-Chi is how it's said.
For the last 40 years, I've been saying Shang-Chi, though.
Yeah,
right?
most people have. So
have you always said Shang-Chi, like even before this whole movie thing, or did you always like?
Well, that's a bit of a loaded question, my Asian American friend, because if we'll go in the short version, I am a Cantonese Chinese American like you, but I am third generation. I don't speak basically any Cantonese. Basically, no Cantonese is what I have. I took Mandarin in school because Mandarin is more prevalent standardized Chinese language. So I got a fundamental of Mandarin phonetics, which they teach you first thing when you're learning Mandarin in school. So that's why I feel confident about my phonetics, if not my language ability. My Mandarin is shitty. It's just shitty. I'm not saying it's like a fluent Chinese speaker, but the fundamentals I get.
Important caveat, right? Because this is going to be the definitive YouTube about how to pronounce Shang-Chi's name.
It is Shang-Chi. Because yeah, like if you read like the piece I have on the blog, as a side quest, went into YouTube, simple search, Shang-Chi pronunciation. Your first 10 hits or so are short videos of people pronouncing Shang-Chi. And they're literally just people like taking video clips of people in Marvel saying the character's name as Shang-Chi. So those are wrong. And then there's like a couple of them that are people pronouncing it closer to Mandarin correct, but one of them is like a guy with a British accent, and they pronounce their vowels differently from American English anyway. So he says it's sort of Shang-Chi, like sort of flourish. So it's not how we would say it in American English anyway. So honestly, if you just go to YouTube and type in pronounce Shang-Chi right now, you'll get a lot of dodgy, not very correct videos.
Which is why we're trying to game the algorithm that if you type Shang-Chi pronunciation, this is the first video that'll pop up.
Yeah,
and we will be the definitive explainer on that.
And to be sure, the way Simu says it in the movie is how billions of Mandarin speakers say it. It's like shouldn't be a big mystery. They're saying it standard in the movie. So go see the movie.
Shang-Chi.
Shang.
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 S-H-A-N-G. Shang.
That's what I said.
So why is it that this two-syllable name is engendering so much conversation about how you so much so to your point that there's a scene in the film, at least in the trailer, I don't know if it makes it in the actual film. Yeah. There's a whole scene in the trailer where Awkwafina and Simu Liu are talking about how to pronounce his name. And it's not like it's the most difficult name to pronounce. I mean...
Right. Well, it depends like how you feel about Chinese phonetics or how much exposure you've had to them. So for one thing, so like there's a scene in one of the spots for the movie where they're having this funny exchange about how to say Shang-Chi. And, one of the jokes in the movie, I gather, is that he goes by Shang-Chi, which is funny in its own right. I think that's a good gag because it does sound sort of like Sean, and Sean is sort of a typical American bro name. No offense, love to Sean Taylor, but Sean is also like sounds like one of Matt Damon's 8 brothers in Good Will Hunting, and so that's his alias. And again, context, it would be different in Cantonese, but we're going with the Mandarin standard because Mandarin is more prevalent in the world.
And we're also assuming they're going to be speaking Mandarin in the film and not Cantonese, even though both Michelle Yeoh and Tony Leung speak Cantonese and not Mandarin. But that's neither here nor there.
I heard there was some Cantonese in the film. I'm not sure. We're going to see very soon, within a couple of days. So anyway, so Shang-Chi. There's no true rhyme with that first Shang, but except how do you say Mongolia?
Shangolian.
Yeah, I think the first syllable of Mongolia is the one true rhyme in English. I would tell people it rhymes with swan, like the bird, except just added G on that ing at the end, and it becomes swan or shang. And so a lot of people conventionally call the city in China, Shanghai. And that's fine. That's a conventional pronunciation, but it's not right. It would be Shanghai.
If you're speaking Mandarin, right? Like there's a whole, so one of the things that's
right.
also, disclaimer is that there are literally hundreds of dialects of Chinese, right?
Yeah.
So actual Shanghainese people have their own dialect that's separate and apart from Mandarin. Cantonese is, I think the two biggest language groups are Mandarin and Cantonese, right? So like my question is, again, why does this matter for this particular character? Because, all intents and purposes, when Steve Englehart created him, I think I read somewhere he just like looked up how to say like rising spirit or something like that. And just
so
found, like, got Shang from Shanghai, which is how it was always for like 40 years. And then with this movie, they've changed the actual Chinese character for his name. But for most of his existence, the Shang in Shang-Chi was the Shang in Shanghai.
Actually, almost. Okay, so on the point of how Shang-Chi's name came about, I have a little TED talk on this. It's a 3-part TED talk. I got into a little Twitter messaging with the writer Eric Francisco, who he was writing these 3 pieces for Inverse on Shang-Chi. They're great pieces on Shang-Chi by Eric Francisco. In the first one of his pieces, it ends with saying Shang-Chi means rising spirit. So factually, that's not exactly right. So, okay, the first part was when, to my understanding, when Shang-Chi was being invented by, I believe, Steve Englehart and Jim Starlin, I think they just looked through the I Ching, or the I Ching, if you say it in the conventional, how it looks in the English way, but it's I Ching, the Book of Changes. And they found,
where the famous Arashikage logo also comes from. Yeah. Hexagram 63.
Right. Yeah, it's the source of everything.
Yeah, those Marvel Comics guys just love. You know what? I think Larry's copy of the I Ching was just like laying around, perhaps, in the Marvel offices, and they were just like, whenever we need something, let's consult the I Ching.
It's a good source book from 5,000 years ago. But anyway, so he comes across this character, Shang, very old character. By the way, these are old, archaic Chinese characters. They're used in the old books. They aren't used now, or they are used now, but in completely different applications. Anyway, so he came around the character Shang, and which goes with Chi in some way, and just sort of made it be Shang-Chi, or rather Shang-Chi, because Shang looks better than Shang, which has a little E in the middle of it. So when it was created, it was both real Chinese and not real Chinese. It was those are real Chinese phonemes, but you wouldn't use them as a name, but that's okay because it's a superhero anyway. But he came up with Shang-Chi technically, but no one ever cared. so the character of that, for the first character in Shanghai is a very common character. It just, Shanghai literally means just like besides the ocean, near the ocean, right? So that Shang is a sense of on top of or rising with, and she is the the spirit, which is a word which means spirit, which is as layered a word in Chinese as it is in English. It can mean the spirit of a room, or one's actual essential soul, or just air, or something like the force. So Qi is the word we're more familiar with in the West. So we proposed Shang-Chi, and that worked. The only problem is you wouldn't really use that Shang in a name, that exact character. So finally, they get to having to produce this movie. So they have to have some standardized way of writing it in Chinese, right? So they changed the character again to not that Shang, but another Shang, which sort of evokes the idea of a monk or a holy man, some sort of monastic discipline. So it's very well chosen as a name, really, because without being a literal phrase, it evokes different things we would want to see in a mystical superhero. So it's still pronounced Shang-Chi, it's just with different characters. And we could say it's standardized now because it's on the Chinese poster, written in Chinese authority approved standard characters.
Is it though? Because that's the other thing that I think was interesting. I don't know if you mentioned it in your post, but like the Chinese language poster was using traditional characters and not simplified
Right,
characters,
right.
which is this the Hong Kong calendar? This is the Hong Kong poster, and maybe and not the like mainland China, because I don't even know if this movie is playing in mainland China. It may or may
That's
not
a
be playing.
very good question. It better be.
And this is here's another like Chinese language thing that people watching this video may or may not be familiar with, but like not only is there Cantonese and Mandarin and all the thousands of dialects, but like there's a way of writing Chinese characters that is different in primarily Hong Kong and Taiwan, and then the rest of mainland China. I think in the Cultural Revolution, right? Mao simplified the Chinese alphabet to have fewer strokes, to be more proletariat, I guess, you know.
Yeah,
and then but Hong Kong and Taiwan retained the more traditional way of writing. And it's not every word, right? Like some words are the same in both simplified and traditional, but a lot of words are different. And chi is one of them, that it's different simplified than it is in traditional. And that poster that was going around that has all of the, you know, actors' names with their Chinese names, except for Awkwafina. I'm surprised Awkwafina went by the phonetic Awkwafina, and not like you know, whatever her Chinese name is.
It's a worldwide brand.
I
bet that's how they spell Awkwafina water too. I assume.
Yeah.
So they go with what's recognizable. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So they're traditional and simplified characters, and they mainly use simplified on mainland because for the reason they're simpler, they're easier to write. My understanding is they often use traditional characters in something like a print ad because they are simply prettier. They're the older version, they're more complex, and they simply look cooler on a display. So I think that's why they often choose to use that on the posters. Granted, it is a subtle, interesting thing given the political situation between Taiwan and mainland China, because Taiwan is the place that definitely uses traditional characters all the time and everything. So yeah, that is interesting. But yeah, in general, that Chi, that second character, is the poster is the more complicated version, which is just the cooler looking version because the traditional ones are cooler looking. But they're harder to write. It takes twice as long to write everything.
Tony Leung is getting this, I wouldn't even say renaissance, because the dude has been putting output for years. He never went away. And it's just people in the West are discovering him if they haven't already. And I just find it fascinating that Tony Leung is, now that he's becoming a household name in America, especially, I mean, he's a Marvel villain, for God's sake. All of this like accuracy on how to pronounce one's name, you know, because of the Cantonese Mandarin divide, the way Tony Leung spells his name in English is not how you pronounce his name in Chinese. And, you know, we already established like the difference between Cantonese and Mandarin. And here, I apologize to all of my family and anyone who speaks Mandarin and or Cantonese, but Tony Leung is, like every entertainment journalist, how they say his name, is actually Tony Leung. Like there's almost like an R in his name, like Leung. His name is Leung Chiu-wei. That's his actual name. Speaking of Tony Leung, there's a video
and
that's blowing up.
These phonetics are hard. I'm bad at them. I'm bad at them.
There's a video that's blowing up on our YouTube channel. Fa La Chen, who plays his wife in the movie, talks about how easy it is to fall in love with Tony Leung. And like, yeah, seriously, like that's true whether you're on set with him or watching him from the comfort of your own home. And people are like posting in the comments, like, you know, you're pronouncing his name wrong. So it's just like,
some people are really excited about calling other people out for pronouncing their name wrong based on little personal experience. I want to add one more thing about Shang-Chi, which I think is interesting. I mean, one reason we're talking about this is there's a definitive way to say this. It's not like one of those Marvel words that were just made up by Stan Lee, like Galactus or Magneto. That's why some people get confused, like, oh, there's a Marvel way to say Shang-Chi. No, they actually just took Chinese words and that made a superhero name, because that suggests that, you know, all Chinese stuff is fanciful and weird and sounds like it's a superhero name anyway. So it's not like they just made up some stuff and there's a Marvel way to say it. They grabbed some Chinese words and they didn't fully understand them, and we're fleshing it out in a way that totally makes sense now within standard Mandarin. And so, I mean, yes, and we can get hung up on there are lots of dialects and stuff, but there is a very standardized Mandarin language, and the way these things are phoneticized, that is the most widespread version of Chinese that most people have to contend with. And that's why we bias our conversations towards this way. And that's why we're going to say Shang-Chi.
your screen, hit play, so check this.